you have to understand that land contracts have different names, those also known as. A land contract, depending on the jurisdiction or the state you're in, can be called a contract for deed, a land sales contract, or sometimes called an installment sales contract. Understand that those terms are used interchangeably, and a lot of it depends on which test you're taking. That'll determine which term is going to be used. Now, two things, as we've talked about in previous videos, parties to contracts have legal names, and we have to know what they are. The vendor is the owner, and the owner is the one who gives the land contract. And then the vendee is the buyer, and they're the ones receiving the land contract. So from here forward, I'm going to be using the term vendor and vendee. Vendor is the owner, vendee is the buyer. All right, land contracts, they are what we call seller financing. So the owner plays the role as the lender. They are the bank, and they are financing the equity that they have in their home to the vendee, who in return is making monthly payments, right? So let's take just to visualize this, and we're going to jump to number 3 real quick. Let's visualize this. When you buy a property and you've gotten pre-approved from your local bank, you hire an agent, the agent finds you a house, you make an offer on the house, the owner accepts the offer, then the bank lends the money, you go to closing, the documents are signed, title, remember his ownership, passes to you, the new buyer, and the bank puts a lien against the property in case you foreclose, or in case you default on payments and they need to foreclose. From contract to closing, things like title searches were done or abstracts were updated. We had inspections, those type of things. That's a normal deal. Land contracts really aren't any different. You find the house, you have an agent involved, they find you a house. The offer is made, the owner accepts your offer, with the exception that financing terms is going to be a land contract or seller financing instead of the bank borrowing the money. The land contract is drawn up by an attorney. The attorney sends the land contract, which is a distinct, separate legal instrument. It's sent over to the title company. The title company does title search. They issue title insurance, or maybe an abstract is updated, again, depending on the state. You have your inspections that are done like a normal deal. It goes to closing. And at closing, instead of the parties or the buyer, the vendee, signing all of the bank documents, they're going to sign the land contract. Title company records everything. Another difference is after signing the land contract, understand, and we're going to talk more about this, the seller retains title. The title is not transferred to the buyer. That's one of probably the biggest distinction here. And then, the vendee makes monthly payments, and then at some point when it's paid off, they get ownership. And I'm going to explain more about that. But I wanted to kind of illustrate how the process works, because so many times real estate professionals get really confused on how it works. Really is no different than a normal transaction. The biggest issue is who retains title and the types of documents that are signed at closing. And we're going to talk more about that in this video. So when are land contracts used? Well, land contracts are used when an investor, the biggest time that I see it really is, and this is a good tool to use if you're an investor, when an investor gets to the point where they're like, hey, it's time to start offloading my properties. And if I sell a rental property or investment property, for example, there's going to be serious tax consequences that tax year, because there's recapture tax that's going to be recaptured by the IRS. That's a whole different video. There's capital gains that's going to have to be paid and stuff like that. So it allows for the investor to defer not only capital gains, but also to have monthly incomes coming in. Now, this is the great thing about a land contract, is you have the monthly payment coming in, but you don't have all the headache of maintenance and plugged up toilets and whatnot, because that becomes the responsibility of the vendee. So if I'm an investor, I might want to sell my property on land contract. So I experience those benefits. Now, on the buyer side, the buyer may have credit issues, and this is a great way for them to get into a property that they want. And the cool thing about the Vendee is, let's say after 2 or 3 years, they decide they want to refinance it and they go to a bank and get pre-approved. The bank is going to recognize that that land contract has been seasoned for a couple of years, and then it's a refinance instead of an original purchase, which means that the buyer doesn't have to come up with large down payments. Their credit eligibility might be a little bit less than if they're purchasing. They typically can finance the closing cost into the loan. So a refi is a whole lot easier than an original purchase. And typically banks will look at land contracts as after being seasoned for 2 or 3 years, it becomes a refinance, which is a good thing. So, all right. So let's look at some important points regarding land contracts. Number one, as I said earlier in the video, but I want to reiterate this, the seller retains legal title to the property at closing. All right, so they have legal title, and then the buyer receives what we call equitable interest, or in some states we call it equitable title. That's important because it gives them a right to use and possess, but they don't have ownership yet. They have a future ownership, and there is another video, a previous video I did describing what equitable interest is, and I'm going to put it right up here in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. It might be a good idea to check out that video when you're done with this one. Seller retains legal title, buyer receives, or I should say vendor retains legal title, vendee has equitable interest or equitable title. Number two, upon completion of the terms, a deed is delivered to the vendee. Now remember, the way we transfer ownership in real estate is by a deed. A deed conveys ownership or conveys title. So typically when the terms of the land contract has been completed, the vendor will generate a deed, and that deed is delivered to the vendee and accepted, then title is passed. Number three, land contract should be recorded and a deed should be held in escrow. Now remember, things are not required to be recorded, but it is a great way to it gives constructive notice to the world of the transaction, and it protects everybody's interest, particularly the vendee. So the land contract should be recorded and a deed held in escrow. So when they sit down to sign the land contract at closing, it's a good idea for the owner to sign a deed. And then that escrow company or an attorney's firm is going to hold on to that deed in the safety deposit box. Because remember, land contracts can be for 2, 3, 5, 10, 20, 30 years. So if that vendor dies within that land contract period, it protects the interest of the vendee. So even though the vendor dies, that deed is held in escrow. So 10 years later, when the vendee completes the terms of that contract, they can notify the escrow company, and the escrow company, on behalf of the vendor, will deliver the deed so proper title transfers to the vendee. So the vendee ends up with proper ownership or legal ownership. If a deed is not held in escrow, then it can be very complicated as the vendor's estate is being processed. And many times I have seen where the vendee has to get an attorney and incur costs to protect their interest. They don't have to do that if it's done correctly. So land contract should be recorded and the deed should be held in escrow. Number four, title search should be done and or an abstract should be updated. Very important, because just like a normal deal, the vendee wants to get future title that's free and clear of any liens or encumbrances of the vendor. We just want to make sure that they're getting later on free, clear, marketable title. Number five, terms should be outlined to outline the responsibility of who's going to pay taxes and insurance. In a normal deal, the bank usually requires an escrow, where an escrow account is set up, and then every month so much money as part of that payment goes into that escrow fund that pays for the annual taxes and insurance. The same principle is here. Is the vendor going to play that role, or is the vendee? That should be negotiated in the land contract. One other thing that's important that's not on here. Vendees and vendors. This is important. The homeowner's insurance that the vendee is going to take out should absolutely ensure that the vendor is listed as what we call loss payee. And the reason that's important is, number one, if the vendee cancels their insurance, then the vendor is notified. Number two is, if there's a casualty, and let's say the place burns down, then the vendor's interest is protected, and the bank or the insurance company knows that they have a mortgage to pay off or a land contract to pay off. So it's very important. Number six, if foreclosure happens, the vendee will lose all monies that they have given. This is different than the normal foreclosure process. So let me give you an example. In most states, let's say that the mortgage is for $50,000 and the bank foreclosed on that loan. Now, just follow along here. So the bank has to foreclose because the buyer stopped making their payments. The outstanding balance of the loan is $50,000, but the property is worth $150,000. So the bank sells it. The bank sells it for $150,000. Their $50,000 is paid off. But there was also $20,000 in foreclosure fees and attorney's fees. So the total expense to the bank is $70,000. $50,000 for the mortgage, $20,000 for legal fees and foreclosure. That means there's $80,000 left over. What happens to that money? Well, that money goes back to the owner of the property that was foreclosed on in most states. A land contract, it isn't like that. All equity, all monies that was received by the vendor from the vendee is gone. It all becomes the vendor's. So the vendee typically will lose everything in a foreclosure. It's really important if you're a real estate professional and you're particularly working with a buyer of a land contract that you give them proper counseling. All right. All right, land contracts. When working with buyers and sellers, this is more for post-licensing. This is for those that are already in the real estate industry. If you're going to work on a land contract deal, and remember, a land contract applies to residential property, industrial, commercial, all types of property. It's not just on residential. Always recommend a land contract be recorded in a deed held in escrow. Now, understand, the vendor and the vendee can agree to alternative terms. If that's the case, fine. We just want to document that in case a complaint is ever filed with the real estate commission in your state. Then you have documentation to say, well, that's not what I recommended, but they did their own thing. All right. So always recommend in writing to your client that the land contract should be recorded and a deed held in escrow. Always recommend a title search is done or an abstract is updated. Number 3, a land contract on top of a mortgage. Now, we talked about why it's important to record a land contract, but a lot of times what investors want to do that own property, particularly rental property, they'll have a mortgage on the property, and then they want to put a land contract on top of that mortgage. That is bad for a real estate professional, because here's why. If you record that contract, which you want to do, then the bank's going to find out, the mortgage holder is going to find out, and then more than likely they're going to invoke what's called the due on sale clause. And that means that that owner, that vendor, is going to have to pay that note off in full all at once. And they may not have the money, they don't want to do it. So a lot of times the owner of the property will say, I'll agree to a land contract, but I do not agree that we're going to record the land contract. That should be a red flag. Is it legal? Yes. However, as a real estate professional, my recommendation to you is not participate in the deal. I have seen this so many times over my career, and it's always ended badly. And that's how you get your real estate license yanked. All right. So anytime there's a land contract deal where the owner is wanting to put a land contract on top of a mortgage, my advice is, number 1, talk to your broker. If you're a broker, talk to legal counsel, but do not be involved in the transaction. All right. Number 4, always recommend buyers pay monthly payments with checks. And here's why. We talked earlier in the video about the powerful thing about someone buying a home on a land contract is once that land contract is seasoned for 2 or 3 years, it gives the vendee the ability to go to the bank and refinance it, and the bank will view it as a refi instead of a purchase, original purchase. But they're going to want proof of payment. And most banks will only accept canceled checks. So it is so important that you counsel your buyers to write, not money orders, personal checks. All right. Number 5, as we talked about, the buyer can refinance after a few years. This is a big deal. Number 6, an attorney must draw up the land contract. Most title companies will not do it. So from that period of contract to close, an attorney will draw up the land contract and send the land contract over the title and escrow company for closing. Or a lot of times then the attorney's firm will actually do the closing. Either way is fine, but just know real estate professionals cannot draw up a land contract. Now, here's one thing. What happens if the owner, the vendor, wants to use his or own land contract? Is that okay? Well, that's okay. But if you're representing the vendee in the transaction, you need to recommend to them to have an attorney review it before they sign on the dotted line. Very important. Again, if the vendee says, you know what, I read it and I'm comfortable with it, that's great. But you want in writing that you recommended that an attorney review it before they signed it. Number 7, indemnification language included. Now, what I mean by that is at the point of closing the land contract to the point of the deed being delivered can be several years. A lot can happen. Now, if you record the document in many states, that will automatically protect the vendee against liens that are filed against the property because something the vendor did. So let's say 2 years after the land contract is signed, the vendor goes out and gets a divorce, and there is child support. In some states, if that land contract is recorded, it legally prevents a lien being placed against that property for child support. Not in all states, but in some. So it's important to know what your state is. Number 2, if you have indemnification language included, if that happens in our scenario, then what it does is it requires the vendor, the owner of the property who owns legal title, to indemnify the vendee against any financial loss because of the vendor's actions. And number 8, only sell 2 properties per year using land contract. This came out of the whole mortgage mess in 2008, 9, and 10. And what it requires is if you're an investor and you have rental property and you're going to start selling your portfolio, which is not a bad idea to do it by land contract, federal regulation only allows you to sell 2 properties on land contract per year. If you do 3 or more, you're considered a mortgage dealer and you must have a mortgage origination license. So you're limited to sell 2 properties on land contract per year. And it doesn't matter the type. It is just 2 periods. So whether it's 2 residential, 1 residential, or 1 commercial, it doesn't matter, 2 per year. That's important to know when you're advising your investor clients that may want to start offloading their investment portfolio. That's pretty much everything on land contracts. If you're going to continue studying, check out this video. It will help you. And hey, do me a favor. If you have not subscribed to the channel, please do so. Click the little circle to my left here. I would appreciate it. I will see you in the next video.